Okay. Now, believe it or not, hi Vermont history students, believe it or not, this is the third time I've tried to make this video. And the first time I was in my basement and the light shut off, and just now I finished it and got a write error, whatever the error of writing it was. So I'm kind of nervous, and it does appear to be running. But welcome to my porch, and now I really feel like kind of trying to keep this short. This section, this unit of the course, Unit 10, is comprised of two parts. The first is on Vermont in the 1940s and 50s, the second on Vermont in the 1960s, okay? And I'll just tell you a brief word about each. As far as the course goes, most of you have 2 papers in, which is great, and give me one more by next week. And the discussion question about regulation being a threat or the best thing for uphillers, I've had a look. Most of you think that too little regulation is the problem for uphillers, which is fine. I will go respond to that question if I can ever make this video. And so anyway, here's the thing. Vermont in the 1940s and 50s is a really cool era. It's a really interesting era. It's sort of like a netherworld between what Vermont was and what it will become. And you think about the death of the old economy. Dairy farms. Vermont in 1945 has 26,000 dairy farms, and by the mid-1960s it's down to 6,900. And if you think about like the loss of 19,000 dairy farms and 5 people for a farm, I mean, you're talking about the displacement of about a quarter of Vermont's population. Displacement both economically and geographically in many cases. In addition, like industries like textiles dying, you know, the Quechee Mill, the Winooski Mill, American Woolen Mill, those closed in the 1950s. And so there needs to be something to replace those things. But what to replace them, and at what pace and at what magnitude is really sort of the question. And so Vermont's caught in this sort of weird in between. And it's cool, and a good model for this is the story of Susie Wilson. And Susie Wilson Road goes through Essex. I used to commute on it every single day when I taught at UVM for 10 years. And Susie Wilson had a farm there, where it is in Essex, and it's right near Fort Ethan. And during World War II, a lot of soldiers were stationed at Fort Ethan. And what happened was she would have them over to her house on weekend nights and for dinner. But the rumor was that she was doing more, that she was a prostitute, and even a madam, bringing in other local women to service, make a little extra money from the soldiers. And so no one really knew for sure, although some people must have known. Uphillers knew, but they never tell downhillers their secrets. And then the war ended and the soldiers dried up and went off. She died. They needed to build a road because the population of Essex was going up so much. And so since it was through her farm, they named it after her. And the reason that population got big in Essex, of course, is because of IBM. Tom Watson, the president of IBM, liked skiing at Stowe, and then the Greater Burlington Development Corporation convinced him to put a plant in Essex. And when he did, Essex blew up, and the workers came, and then doctors and lawyers and teachers and other people came to service them. And then the reason why they put the plant there, IBM, is because the IBM thought that it was a really high quality of life, and it was. I mean, it was a great place to live, and it's beautiful scenery, and it's a great, you know, high quality of life. But of course, what happens is that Essex becomes really developed, and then you have the same problems you had back down in the New York area with traffic and strip malls and all the other problems. Don't get me wrong, I love living in Essex, but it is pretty suburban, you know. And so the question was how much development and how fast, and can you save the very best things that draw people there, but also have development and growth and have jobs that replace the ones that are being lost. And that's sort of the trap in which Vermont falls. And this is true of the Swedes, my Swedes, who originated down in Landgrove. Most of them had gone off and lived in Arlington and Bennington and Brattleboro by this point. And Landgrove had been basically bought up by this guy from New Jersey named Sam Ogden. He arrived in 1930. First, the village in the center of town he bought, and most of those houses were deserted, and he fixed them up, sold them to his wealthy and friends. It became this cool artist community, painters and writers and architects, and it became increasingly expensive and hard for uphill people to live there. By the 1950s, you've got one Swede family left, and that's Alve Nielsen. And he was left, and in the meantime, most of the other Swedes, as I said, had gone to like urban centers for Vermont. And so what you're seeing is a reversal of the pattern. In the Gilded Age, the uphillers lived in small towns and the downhillers lived in the urban centers. And now, increasingly, the uphillers can't afford to live anywhere but White River Junction and Springfield and Brattleboro and St. Johnsbury and Burlington. And the downhillers want to have big houses out in the country. So it's like a reversal of the settlement pattern, if you know what I mean. And then, as far as land growth goes, really it blows up in the 1950s. Bromley Mountain is already in Peru, and then Stratton comes in, and Killington comes in, and Magic Mountain come in. They're all right there in the Londonderry, Stratton area. And so then it becomes increasingly a vacation place. And so the development pressures started to get big, and then got even bigger because of the interstate highways, which started to get built in the late 1950s. It's a project that's still going on, but through the 60s, the highways were making their way through Vermont. And it became really clear that Vermont, if it was going to control its own destiny, now being within a day's driving distance of 80 million people, some dramatic things needed to be done. And they were accomplished in the 1960s when Phil Hoff was president, the first Democrat to be governor, or was governor, the first Democrat to be governor since before the Civil War, elected in 1962, couldn't get much done at first because the legislature was dominated by small towns, the one town, one vote apportionment. But in 1965, the Supreme Court ruled that that apportionment was unconstitutional, and they had to reapportion by population. And a lot of people consider the reapportionment in 1965 as the dividing line between the old Vermont and the new Vermont. And now it's a much more urban-oriented, much more professional-oriented, much less small-town-driven state legislature. And then Hoff was able to get all sorts of, he did studies about scenery and planning and zoning and all these things, and became a big thing in Vermont, is how can you save Vermont from irrational development? And this came to a culmination in 1970. Hoff left office in '69, and his successor, Dean Davis, a Republican, was an environmentalist. And his administration and the legislature got together and enacted Act 250, which is a comprehensive statewide planning and development law. It's the most comprehensive and first of its kind nationwide. And it rules what you can build and where you can build and how you can build, and its impact on water resources and on roads and on scenery and all these things, right? And so by 1970, it's clear Vermont is a very environmentalist state. But the question for you by Friday is, so if Vermont became an environmentalist state, which it did, was it environmentalist because the downhillers came to see it the uphill way, or because the uphillers had to come see it the downhill way? I mean, is Vermont an environmentalist state because it's a lesson downhillers taught to uphillers, or uphillers taught to downhillers? And that's the question I want you to grapple with. And hopefully this video worked out. And you can see my yard. I can check. Here's my yard. There's my lacrosse bounce back machine and my grill. And no cats around right now. Lacrosse sticks, basketballs, basketball hoop at the bottom. Okay.